conference or a webinar. Yeah.
Good morning. Welcome to this Fed Up Coalition press conference. My name is Gerald Posner. I'm the author of Pharma, Greed, Lies, and the Poisoning of America. Simon & Schuster published that book on March 10th, and a lot of it focuses on the origins of the opioid epidemic and how it ravaged America, and particularly the companies, the executives, and the families that profited off of the trail of devastation and death left by opioids. I'm very proud today to be part of this Fed Up Coalition press conference with 4 speakers. 3 of them are leading opioid activists, Emily Walden, Nan Golden, and April Rivera. And we also have a whistleblower that many of you will be familiar with, Bruce Boyes. They will be speaking in just a moment. The reason we've asked you to come here and listen to this today is Fed Up Coalition has organized a letter that will go off to the Department of Justice requesting that the Attorney General should start criminal prosecutions and cases and investigations of individuals, and I emphasize the word individuals, executives, not just companies, but the people who have been the architects of creating the opioid epidemic that has ravaged this country for the past 20 years. In addition to the DOJ letter, Fed Up has also created an online petition at change.org. And that petition asks for a similar item. It's in your press release. We'll have it later. We'll provide it as well. And that can be signed by individuals. There'll also be an opportunity at the end of this conference, some 5 to 7 minutes, depending on how much time we have left, for you to ask questions. You'll be able to do that in the Q&A box. Those questions will be there. The panelists can answer them in writing, or they can answer them just by giving an audio statement here. And those questions, we'll get to as many of them as we can. One last quick thing before getting to the first speaker about the Fed Up Coalition. I think this is important. They are the sponsors today. Fed Up is a grassroots coalition of local advocacy organizations and families who have been literally ripped apart by opioids. They have sought to and asked the federal government repeatedly to do everything it can to end this epidemic. Fed Up does not accept any money from pharmaceutical companies or any of their affiliates. 100% of all of the proceeds that they get go to their advocacy. What does that mean? It means that bottom line, they can't be bought. And that's very important in an industry in which too many people are suspect to giving up what their positions are for a little bit of money. So they stand strong on this. And it's particularly important that they chose this day, International Overdose Awareness Day, to have this press conference. It's pretty appropriate that our first speaker happens to be the current chair of the Fed Up Coalition, and that's Emily Walden. Emily lost her son, TJ, a Kentucky National Guardsman, in 2012 to the opioid crisis, and that she turned her grief into frontline action. On the front lines every year, she's been going to Washington, D.C. and trying to get the changes made to make a difference on this epidemic. In 2015, she was the founder in Kentucky of Stop Now, Stop the Organized Pill Pushers Now. And I'm really very, very proud to introduce her as the first speaker here. Emily?
Good morning. I am the mother of TJ Walden, who lost his life in 2012 at the age of 21. My son started with Oxycontin and then moved to the drug Opana. The drug Opana, or oxymorphone, was very easy to obtain in my area, Louisville, Kentucky, and was the Opana pipeline to Scott County, Indiana, where the HIV crisis happened in 2015. Endo Pharmaceuticals has held the patent for oxymorphone since the 1950s. Endo had the exact same drug on the market in the 60s and 70s that caused addiction and death throughout our country, and was later removed from the market in 1979 for safety reasons. They knew exactly what was going to happen when Opana was approved in 2006. And yet, according to lawsuit settlements, they still marketed Opana as less addictive. As Opana was more widely prescribed and local health departments started putting out warnings in 2010, the CEO at the time said the Opana franchise grew more than 30% as a result of promotional strategies targeting key physicians. His salary was $2 million a year, $8 million with perks. The executives during those periods of time knew they were causing harm, killing thousands of people, and continued for the sake of profits. Endo executives manipulated the system, from sitting at the table with the FDA, creating a new clinical trial that removes safety to get oxymorphone back on the market, to contributing to so-called advocacy groups to help promote their drug. When Opana deaths started to increase or was heavily marketed in certain areas, Endo even hired additional lobbyists in those states. In 2012, the year that my son died, Endo only reported 449 adverse effects to Opana to the FDA. Only after being forced by the lawsuits filed, they added 21,966 in 2018. At an FDA meeting in 2017 that discussed the safety of their abuse deterrent formula, an Endo executive shrugged his shoulders and said they were no different than any other opioid maker. Endo had followed in the steps of Purdue Pharma for the sake of profits. My son's life and the many other lives lost were worth more than the millions of dollars they made off their drug. These executives must be held accountable for what they have done. This is America, and you can make all the money you want, but you should not be allowed to kill hundreds of thousands of people and get away with nothing but paying a damn fine. This has got to stop, and we need action now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Emily. It's moving, and it's a reminder also. I think I've learned this in the time in studying this, that every overdose is someone's son or daughter. You learn that, and when you deal with the families, you understand how frustrating it is for you to see your activism not answered at the highest levels in Washington. Nan Golden is going to be next. Many of you will know Nan. She's a celebrated American photographer. In terms of her art and her work, she often explores LGBT bodies, moments of intimacy. She's highlighted on the HIV crisis and now the opioid epidemic. Nan is responsible for organizing PAIN, the Prescription Addiction Intervention Now group that you see at the forefront of many of the most recent efforts to shame the Sackler family into taking some responsibility for what they did over a period of decades regarding their star drug OxyContin. She is herself a survivor of a opioid overdose. She turned that experience into fighting the epidemic through protest and her photography. Welcome, Nan.
My name is Nan Golden. I survived the opioid epidemic. And when I got sober, I looked for the architects of this crisis, and it led me to Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family. I decided to make it my mission to hold them accountable. I learned of the culpability of the Sacklers and their company, Purdue, from investigative journalism in the fall of 2017. I decided to make the personal political and started a group called PAIN, Prescription Addiction Intervention Now, which pushes the museums and institutions to refuse funding and to take down the name of the Sacklers. We've been successful through our direct actions, and the National Portrait Gallery, the Tate Museum, the Guggenheim, and the Met Museum have refused future funding. The Louvre and Tufts University have scrubbed their name. Richard Sackler, when promoting this blockbuster at an OxyContin's launch party in 1996, bragged that Purdue Pharma would unleash a blizzard of prescriptions so deep, dense, and white, it will bury the competition. He met his goal. The Sacklers got their blizzard, and we got buried. Payne has also shamed them publicly, along with investigative journalists. We've made their names synonymous with the opioid crisis. Much of the public now sees them as they are reckless profiteers, pursuing unmitigated financial gain despite knowing the risks, and over 500,000 Americans have died because of their actions. Meanwhile, they accumulated $35 billion off OxyContin. They lied about the addictiveness, used falsified scientific studies to support their claims, paid doctors to serve as corporate advisors, and specialty pharmacies to fill the prescriptions that other pharmacies would not. The Sacklers blamed patients for their own addictions. They capitalized on existing stigma so that people with substance abuse disorder could be used as scapegoats. This is a man-made crisis provoked by one family. We are here today because we cannot properly address the crisis without knowing the truth of how it was created. Purdue Pharma evaded any real accountability in the 2007 criminal trial, which I believe Emily was at, in spite of federal investigators believing they had an airtight case. 3 executives took the fall and paid fines, and the company simply continued business as usual. In the ensuing decade, they accumulated $10 billion from OxyContin, adding to their already immense wealth. Meanwhile, the overdose rate in America rose 250%. How many lives could have been saved if the case against the Sacklers in Purdue had been pursued to its just end? The DOJ let them off in 2007, and we fear it will happen again. Today, during the COVID-19 epidemic, overdose has reached new levels. It's been reported that 2020 has already seen the overdose rate increase by 12%. Pain has come out of the streets and into the courts. We've watched as Purdue declared bankruptcy, successfully averting the eye of the public and avoiding litigation of some 2,000 cases. Power, resources, and million-dollar lawyers allowed Purdue to court shop and find a judge who would treat this business as if it were business as usual. This case is unprecedented because it protects the Sackler family in spite of the fact that they never declared bankruptcy. We pushed the courts to extend the deadline for people to file claims by 3 months. Purdue rewrote the narrative as their own initiative and pushed it for a month. We put up a website to encourage and help people file their claims, and the volume rose exponentially the last month. We wrote a petition for a public examiner, which got 4,000 signatures and many personal stories, heartbreaking, from the families who'd lost their loved ones. I myself is a claimant in this court case. We learned last week about 3 kickback schemes that the Justice Department has revealed. They paid doctors to prescribe Oxy. They paid pharmacies to fill them. And they set up a medical platform that prompted doctors to prescribe Oxy to an unwitting population of victims. This is a man-made crisis by one single family. We are fighting for the release of all the company's documents so the public can understand the mechanisms by which the Sacklers flooded the market. This family and their private pharmaceutical company must not be protected by an opaque legal process controlled by their army of lawyers. They transferred billions from Purdue into offshore accounts to hide money from litigation while shamelessly offering a settlement based on future sales of OxyContin. Meanwhile, they've made their tactics global through Mundi Pharma and their other international companies. Without transparency and accountability, none of Purdue Pharma's bankruptcy proceedings will bring justice to those who have lost their loved ones or suffered the reality of addiction. You're mute.
Nan, thank you very much. For somebody who's not very technically minded, you're very good on that. Thanks for reminding me about the mute button. Nan, thank you for your keeping a spotlight so firmly on Purdue and their outrageousness. If every survivor of an overdose had your ability to sort of generate a fury of trying to bring justice to the perpetrators, we'd have some success in stopping this earlier. So thank you very much for that overview as well. You know, whether Emily's talking about Endo or Nan's talking about Purdue, what we all need, and I do as a journalist as well, to get inside are whistleblowers occasionally. We need to find out from what's going on behind the scenes in terms of the sales and promotion department and the executive decisions being made. And that brings us to our next speaker, Bruce Boyes. He's spent nearly a quarter century in the pharmaceutical industry, and he spent 14 years, starting in 2003, working with the Justice Department on bringing 2 false claims cases against Teva and Cephalon. He knows this industry inside. He's seen it from Antique and others, and he'll talk about this. He's a mentor now for other whistleblowers and about the protections and the need for whistleblowers and consumer safety and medical cases and the opioid crisis in coming forward. I'm very glad to introduce him next. Bruce?
You're
Bruce,
muted.
you do need to unmute.
There you go. Thank you. Again, thank you for having me. It's a very important web seminar. I can't think of anything more important than the comments that are being made today. I was with Cephalon in around the year 2000. I was an area manager for them at the time. And what occurred was that I wound up seeing that there was some off-label activity by other area managers, and they were selling the company's products off-label so that they were able to gain greater bonuses. At the time, we were selling Gabatril, Provigil, and Actique. Actique is the fentanyl product. And fentanyl, as you well all know that it's 100 times more potent than morphine and 50 times more potent than heroin. And it was indicated for oncology patients that were terminally ill. That was the only indication it had at the time. And what the company did was that they started to promote the product, Actique, to patients in general practice that had low back pain or migraine patients. These were patients that were drug naive, which for migraine patients, you can all look that up, is contraindicated. So it was not just a step too far for me, it was way beyond what I was willing to do with the company. And I was actually gonna just pick up and move to another company because I had done very well in the industry, and I just figured I was gonna get another job someplace. And a friend called and said, would you do something about it? And I said, I would. And that was the FDA. And Office of Criminal Investigation got a hold of me and asked me if I would wear a wire, and I said I would. And I wore a wire for approximately not quite 2 years to build the case, because I was told that the Justice Department really weren't interested in a case unless it was a cupcake case or a low-hanging fruit that they would jump on and they would go for. So in doing so, I wasn't first to file. I was third in the first case. And the agent that I was with that actually spoke on 60 Minutes about a month ago said, I really need to get a lawyer. And I thought it was for me to get a lawyer because I did something wrong. And he said, no, you need to protect yourself under the False Claims Act. And at that point, I got a lawyer with Phillips & Cohen and filed my first case against the company with Gabatril, Provigil, and Actique. We fought that for several years, and what happened was that we were wrapping up the case. We were successful. The DOJ did jump in and intervene, and what happened with that is that the FDA, for whatever reason, approved Fintora, which is another fentanyl product that actually was twice as strong in bioavailability as what Actique was. Why the FDA approved that, I have no idea, but they did. And immediately after they had done a switch campaign, and for some of you all not knowing what pharmaceutical companies will do, is that they're going to make a generic of the first brand product. They're going to go to their new product, which is really a Me Too and just a clever configuration of a covalent bond or something. They wound up then switching to Fintora. So they were promoting the drug reps to go in and tell doctors to switch off of Actique and switch them on Fintora. And the switch campaign, as soon as it happened, they had 5 overdoses of migraine patients pretty readily. And part of it was that the company was paying for the higher dose of drug to the patients. So if you got a naive patient for opioids, you're going to wind up having trouble with that. So with that, we had a second case because the Justice Department decided to have a second case. As we had the second case, what was amazing to me is that the FDA even approved Fintora. The federal court eventually dismissed Fintora from the case. And the Justice Department really did not hold Cephalon Teva accountable for the overdose deaths. And that's why I wrote my book, Cold Comfort, because there's got to be some form of accountability for these kind of actions. Thank you very much today.
Thank you, Bruce, for your bravery. Thanks for your action, and I wish I could clone you. Our final speaker here today is April Rivera. April lost her son, Joey, to an opioid overdose in 2009. She's now the executive director of the National Coalition Against Prescription Drug Abuse, headquartered in San Ramon, California. It's a nonprofit organization whose sort of purpose and mission is to prevent prescription drug-related substance use disorder and overdoses, and they do it at every level, from legislation advocacy at local, state, and federal governments, policy changes, and community education. I'm really glad to be able to introduce her now. April?
Thank you, Gerald. I'm putting a photo up here so you can just see who else we've lost among the hundreds of thousands of people out there that should be here with us today. So on December 18th, 2018, our family received a devastating call that I know we'll never fully recover from. We learned that our youngest son of 2, Joey, a 21-year-old senior at Arizona State University, had died from a suspected overdose in his off-campus apartment where he was living with a couple of his fraternity brothers. I can tell you that we couldn't have been more shocked. Joey was a good student all through the 4 years that he had been at ASU and even on the dean's list. And he was ready to graduate in just 5 months with both a business and a communication degree. We were really proud of him. He was a great kid, never had any problems at all with him. We had just seen him 3 weeks before when he came home for Thanksgiving break, and there was nothing going on there. So Joey passed away a week before Christmas, and he was in Arizona. We're in California. So instead of enjoying the holidays with him as we were expecting, we had to fly him home from Arizona in a casket and bury him the day after Christmas. What we eventually came to understand as we started digging to try to figure out what had happened to Joey, we came to understand that he had been prescribed outrageous doses and quantities of oxycodone, Xanax, and Soma just 9 days before he died. The prescribing doctor, we learned, was running a pill mill and had made at least $5 million off of her, rogue practice in just a couple of years. Patients were flooding into her office in Los Angeles from every Southern California county, and most of them were young adult males. The local chain pharmacies would no longer fill her prescriptions. They knew she was a dirty doctor. So patients would actually go about 25 to 30 miles away to different independent pharmacies that were rogue themselves, and they would fill any prescriptions that walked in the door. Within 2 weeks after Joey's death and funeral, I basically had enough information to know that she was a bad doctor. And so I reported her to the DEA. And as I did that, I came to understand very quickly that this doctor had been under investigation for at least 2 to 3 years prior to Joey even walking in the door. I also filed a California Medical Board complaint and learned that they were also engaged in an investigation, and they were trying to connect the dots. There were a lot of patients that were dying from this doctor, and they were trying to build a criminal case against her around those multiple patients of hers. The case was eventually handed off to the Los Angeles District Attorney, who had a team working on this complicated case for at least 5 years before the doctor was brought to trial. So that on March 9th, 2012, which would have been Joey's 24th birthday, I was in a courtroom where this doctor was being arraigned on 24 felony counts, 3 of which were second-degree murder, the first time that we understood it had been done in California and possibly around the country. And of course, one of those was Joey, my son. 4 long years passed before a 2-month-long trial ensued. I was in the courtroom every single day of that trial. The doctor was convicted in December 2016 of the 3 murder charges and 20 of the other 21 felony counts. And then she was sentenced in early 2017 to 30 years to life in prison for all those deaths that had been under her watch. It took 8 years for us to get justice for my son and all the others this doctor has harmed. I'm sure that it took several $1 million of taxpayer dollars to bring this case to closure. Most importantly, though, for me, the pill mill was shut down. This doctor will never prescribe again. And, I can say, though, that as I'll discuss here, that could have happened a lot sooner than it did. A lot of lives could have been saved by the action that pharmaceutical companies and their distributors could have taken. So these pharmaceutical company executives knew about this doctor's outrageous prescribing levels. It didn't matter. They didn't do anything. They could have reported her and saved those who passed away, under her care. Distributors knew exactly how many pills they were delivering to the rogue pharmacy, and they didn't do anything. They could have reported the pharmacy and could have saved who knows how many lives. And think about all the other rogue doctors and pharmacies that were out there operating throughout the country and continue to. How could they have made a difference by reporting them? They didn't do it. All of the executives became wealthy through their greedy business practices that resulted in the loss of hundreds of thousands of Americans. And one of those was my son, Joey. It's clear that lawsuits against these companies, the companies themselves alone, isn't going to change practices and behaviors. It's just the cost of doing business for these companies. I strongly urge the Attorney General Barr to hold these executives of these companies personally accountable for their actions that established and helped sustain the worst drug epidemic in US history.
Thank you, April, very, very much. As we're coming at closing up near the end of our press conference, I do want to remind everybody that the Department of Justice letter signed by over 60 organizations, there is on change.org a similar petition for individuals to find. You'll find that in the chat box. It's included in the press release. But in addition, there's one question that was asked about what's being done about the FDA's role in this. I know that many of those who spoke today also know that the Office of the Inspector General, the OIG, and Congress is being pushed repeatedly to open up investigations in the FDA's actions from the 96 approval of OxyContin through other approvals all the way up through Endo and others. I just want to leave with this word. This call today, this petition, this letter that's being sent in and organized by Fed Up, and you've heard from speakers from Nan Golden and from Emily and from April Rivera and from Bruce. It's not just an esoteric matter, a matter for technical debate. It's an urgent matter. And the reason I say that is in 2006, we now know with a recently released document, some of you will have seen it, from the Justice Department, in which they had determined then that criminal charges should be brought against Purdue, not just by the way fines, that they should be charged for the way that they conducted themselves in the early 90s with the OxyContin approval before the FDA, with pages of information as to what. They had complicity to defraud through marketing OxyContin, and guess what? Nothing was done. Some of you, as Nan had mentioned, may be aware that in the current filings in the bankruptcy case, the federal claims for criminal charges just against Purdue and individuals and executives include kickbacks to doctors to induce and reward prescriptions, kickbacks to electronic health vendor, and kickbacks to specialty pharmacies. The time is running out because the statute of limitations is running out on some of these crimes. The statute of limitations is running out on RICO, the racketeering, which has a 5-year period. On some of them in 2016, we're going to be out of them by next year. This is the last opportunity in many cases. And it will be a slap in the face if criminal investigations, probes, and charges are not brought, a slap in the face to the tens of thousands of OxyContin victims who died, to the families of those victims, and to people themselves who've been victimized, who spent thousands of dollars on drug treatment programs, who lost their jobs, had their marriages crashed over time, and had their lives turned upside down. I hope that this will not be an acquittal through neglect, because that's what's happened in the past. It would be a travesty